Every parent knows the crushing weight of watching your child go without while you struggle to find work. MacAllister sold his last possession yesterday, the toolbox that once built bridges, just to keep his 7-year-old daughter fed for another week. Now he stands outside a corporate tower, watching wealthy executives enter a hiring gala through golden doors he'll never walk through. His clothes are clean but worn, his pride buried beneath desperate necessity. When CEO Aurelia Chen steps from her car, Mac approaches with trembling hands. "Please give me any job, ma'am. I'll do anything." She hires him as a night janitor out of impulse. But while mopping floors, Mac discovers something that could save thousands of lives, cost him everything. His hidden skills as a master welder might be exactly what her failing company needs. The question is, when the corporate world discovers who he really is, will they embrace his genius or crush him for daring to rise above his station? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the cramped apartment, casting shadows across the collection of medical bills scattered on MacAllister's kitchen table. He sat with his head in his hands, the weight of 43 years, pressing down on shoulders that had once carried steel beams across construction sites. The coffee in his chipped mug had grown cold hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to move. "Daddy, are you okay?" Rosie's small voice drifted from the doorway. At 7 years old, she had inherited her mother's gentle spirit and Mac's stubborn determination. Her brown hair hung in tangled waves around a face that still carried traces of sleep, but her eyes, those sharp, observant eyes, missed nothing. Mac lifted his head and managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just thinking, sweetheart. How are you feeling this morning?" Rosie padded across the linoleum floor in her worn pajamas, the ones with the faded unicorns that Sarah had bought her 2 Christmases ago, before everything changed, before the cancer, before the medical bills that seemed to multiply like weeds in an abandoned garden. "My chest feels tight again," Rosie admitted, climbing onto Mac's lap with the trust that only children possess. "But I drew you something." She pressed a piece of construction paper into his Hansard crayon drawing that made his throat tighten. It showed a stick figure in a hard hat standing on what could generously be called a bridge, with "Daddy at Work" written in uneven letters across the top. Below it, in her careful printing, she had added, "My hero builds things that help people." Mac hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, a small luxury he still insisted on buying, even when everything else got cut from the budget. "It's beautiful, Rosie. Just like you." The truth was, Mac hadn't built anything in 8 months. Not since Meridian Steelworks closed its doors, taking with it not just his job, but the identity he had spent 20 years crafting. He had been more than a welder there. He had been an innovator, developing techniques that made bridge joints stronger and more resilient. His protocols had been adopted by 3 other facilities before budget cuts and overseas manufacturing made his expertise obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same bridges he had helped design still carried thousands of cars each day, but the man who had strengthened their bones couldn't find work fixing fence posts. Rosie's breathing grew shallow as she settled against his chest, a sound that never failed to spike his anxiety. The pediatric specialist had been clear. Her asthma was manageable with proper treatment, but proper treatment required insurance. Insurance required employment. Employment, it seemed, required miracles. "Daddy, will you get a job today?" Rosie asked, with the innocent faith that children carry like shields against the world's harsh realities. "I'm going to try my best," Mac promised, the words tasting like copper pennies in his mouth. After getting Rosie ready for school, a process that involved 3 puffs from an inhaler they couldn't afford to refill, Mac walked her to the bus stop 6 blocks away. The September morning carried the crisp promise of autumn, but Mac felt only the weight of another day, stretching ahead with no prospects. "Mr. Mac," called Mrs. Rodriguez from her porch. The elderly woman had become an unofficial grandmother to Rosie since Sarah's death, often watching her when Mac had job interviews or was working his occasional cash jobs. "Any luck yesterday?" Mac shook his head. "Still looking." "That girl needs stability," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, not unkindly. "And you need to stop carrying the world on your shoulders." If only it were that simple. Mac watched the school bus disappear around the corner, then began his daily pilgrimage through the city's industrial district. His resume, printed on paper that had grown soft from handling, nestled in a folder that had seen better days. 20 years of experience, certifications in 3 different welding techniques, recommendations from supervisors who had genuinely respected his work. On paper, he should have been employable. But paper didn't account for the reality of a shrinking manufacturing sector, or the preference for younger workers who came without the baggage of family obligations. Paper didn't explain why a man with his skills was reduced to begging for minimum wage positions that barely covered rent, let alone medical expenses. By afternoon, Mac had visited 14 businesses. He had shaken hands with managers who looked past him before he finished speaking, filed applications that would disappear into database oblivion, and smiled until his face ached while being told they would keep his resume on file. That's when he saw the banner stretched across the facade of Chen Technologies' downtown headquarters, "Innovation Gala Hiring the Future Today." The building rose 43 stories into the Seattle sky, all glass and steel geometry that caught the late afternoon light like a crystal prism. Through the lobby windows, Mac could see men and women in sharp suits, networking over champagne and canapés, their confident laughter echoing off marble surfaces. This was where the city's technical elite gathered to shape tomorrow's opportunities. Mac knew he didn't belong inside. His best interview, suit the navy blue one, Sarah had helped him pick out years ago, hung in their closet. But it couldn't hide the calluses on his hands or the weariness in his eyes. More importantly, the gala required advance registration and a $50 networking fee that might as well have been $5,000. So he waited by the service entrance, watching delivery trucks and catering staff come and go. The rational part of his mind knew this was futile, but desperation had long ago silenced reason. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the building's main entrance. The driver emerged first, followed by a woman who moved with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she was accustomed to command. Dr. Aurelia Chen was smaller than Mac had expected from the business magazine photos he had seen. At 41, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought for every achievement. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon, and her tailored suit probably cost more than Mac made in a month when he was employed. But there was something in her posterior tension around her shoulders that suggested the weight of significant pressure. Chen Technologies had been her brainchild, built from a small engineering consultancy into a major player in drone manufacturing. The company's focus on humanitarian applications, disaster relief, medical supply delivery to remote areas, environmental monitoring had earned them both acclaim and skepticism from investors who preferred more traditionally profitable ventures. Mac knew this because he had researched every major employer in the city, memorizing their missions and recent developments in the desperate hope that knowledge might substitute for connections. He knew that Chen Technologies was developing next-generation drones capable of operating in extreme weather conditions. He knew their stock price had fluctuated wildly over the past 6 months as the board pressured Dr. Chen to pivot toward military contracts. What he didn't know, as he watched her stride toward the building's entrance, was that Dr. Chen was fighting her own battle for survival. The quarterly board meeting had ended 3 hours earlier, but Aurelia could still hear the voices of the senior partners echoing in her mind. "The humanitarian market is too niche, Aurelia. Our shareholders need to see immediate returns. Military applications would triple our valuation within 18 months. Perhaps it's time to consider bringing in someone with more traditional experience to guide the company's direction." Each suggestion had felt like a small betrayal of the vision that had driven her to build Chen Technologies in the first place. After earning her PhD in aerospace engineering at 28, she had spent 5 years at Boeing watching brilliant innovations die in committee meetings while executives chased quarterly bonuses. She had founded her company to prove that technology could serve humanity's best impulses, not just its most destructive ones. Now, with the board threatening a no-confidence vote and investors pulling back from their humanitarian drone project, Aurelia wondered if idealism was just another word for commercial suicide. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the figure standing by the service entrance. Almost. MacAllister stood with the careful posture of a man trying to maintain dignity while the world crumbled around him. His jeans were clean but faded, his work boots scuffed but polished. When their eyes met, Aurelia saw something. She recognized the look of someone who had run out of conventional options but refused to surrender. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mac said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I know you don't know me, but I've been looking for work for 8 months. I've got experience with metal fabrication, welding, quality control. I'll do anything, cleaning, maintenance, whatever you need." Aurelia paused. In the span of a heartbeat, she saw not just the man before her, but a reflection of her own situation. Both of them were fighting battles that conventional wisdom said they couldn't win. "What's your name?" she asked. "MacAllister, ma'am. I have a daughter who needs—" He caught himself, straightening his shoulders. "I have 20 years of manufacturing experience." Something in his quiet dignity touched a nerve Aurelia thought she had learned to ignore. Perhaps it was the way he led with his qualifications rather than his desperation. Perhaps it was the recognition of a fellow fighter. Or perhaps it was simply that after hours of listening to board members question her judgment, she was ready to make a decision that was entirely her own. "Report to building services tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., she said. "Ask for Miguel Santos. Tell him Dr. Chen hired you for the night maintenance crew." Mac's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," Aurelia interrupted, already questioning her impulsive decision. "It's temporary work, minimum wage. If you're not reliable, you're gone." "You won't regret this," Mac promised. As Aurelia walked toward the building's golden doors, she wondered if that was true. She had just hired a complete stranger based on nothing more than intuition and a moment of shared recognition. In 12 hours, she would be presenting her company's quarterly projections to a room full of skeptical investors, defending innovations that board members considered commercially naive. But for the first time in months, she had made a decision that felt entirely her own. Mac stood by the service entrance until long after Dr. Chen disappeared into the building. The Seattle evening grew cool around him, but he barely noticed. Tomorrow morning, he would have a job. It wasn't the career that would restore his sense of purpose, but it was a paycheck. It was health insurance for Rosie. It was a chance to stop the slow slide toward complete destitution. As he walked the 6 miles home-saving bus fare for Rosie's inhaler refill, Mac allowed himself something he hadn't indulged in for months: hope. Behind him, 43 stories of glass and steel rose into the darkening sky, housing innovations that could change the world and corporate politics that could destroy dreams. Mac didn't know that his new employer was fighting her own battle for survival, or that the building he would soon be cleaning contained secrets that could save thousands of lives. He didn't know that within a week, his expert eye would spot flaws that million-dollar engineering teams had missed, or that his improvised solutions would become the foundation for breakthroughs his new colleagues couldn't imagine. All Mac knew, as he climbed the stairs to his apartment where Rosie waited with homework and hope, was that tomorrow he would have somewhere to go. Someone had taken a chance on him when conventional wisdom suggested he was a poor investment. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Mac's first night at Chen Technologies began at 10 p.m. after the building had emptied of its daytime inhabitants. Miguel Santos, the building services supervisor, was a weathered man in his 50s who had worked maintenance for 3 decades. He handed Mac a set of keys and a security badge with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Chen says you're reliable," Miguel said, studying Mac with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen too many new hires come and go. "Night shift is different. You're mostly alone up there. Labs on floors 30 through 35 need special attention, expensive equipment, sensitive projects. Can you handle that kind of responsibility?" "Yes, sir," Mac replied, clipping the badge to his uniform shirt. The navy blue polo bore the Chen Technologies logo, a stylized wing that suggested both flight and protection. Miguel led him through the building's maze of service corridors, explaining protocols with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details mattered. Trash gets sorted, regular waste, electronic waste, hazardous materials. Each lab has its own requirements. You see anything suspicious, anything that doesn't look right, you call security immediately. They rode the service elevator to the 32nd floor, where the drone development labs hummed with the quiet energy of machines left running overnight. Through reinforced glass windows, Mac could see workbenches covered with partially assembled aircraft, their carbon fiber frames gleaming under fluorescent lights. "These are the prototypes for the humanitarian project," Miguel explained, using his master key to unlock the main lab door. "Dr. Chen's baby, supposed to deliver medical supplies to disaster zones, places regular aircraft can't reach." Mac nodded, following Miguel into the climate-controlled space. His trained eye immediately catalogued the workshop's contents: precision welding stations, 3D printers, testing equipment that probably cost more than he had made in his last year of employment. But it was the drones themselves that captured his attention. 6 aircraft sat in various stages of completion, each roughly the size of a small helicopter, but sleeker, more elegant. Their frames showed the distinctive honeycomb pattern of advanced composite materials, designed to be both lightweight and incredibly strong. Mac had worked with similar materials during his bridge-building days, though nothing quite this sophisticated. "Beautiful work," Mac murmured, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. "Dr. Chen designed most of it herself," Miguel said with obvious pride. "PhD from MIT, worked at Boeing before she started this company. She's got vision, you know. Wants to use this technology to help people instead of—" He caught himself, perhaps remembering that corporate politics weren't appropriate topics for orientation. They moved through the lab methodically, Miguel explaining cleaning protocols and security procedures. Mac listened carefully, but part of his attention remained focused on the drones. Something about their construction nagged at him, though he couldn't immediately identify what. After Miguel left him with a cart full of cleaning supplies and a detailed checklist, Mac began his work alone. The building's nighttime quiet was broken only by the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional click of cooling equipment. For the first time in months, Mac felt useful again, not in the way that had once defined him, but in a way that provided structure and purpose. He worked methodically through the lower floors, emptying trash bins and mopping corridors with the same attention to detail he had once brought to welding specifications. Each task completed was a small victory, a step toward the stability Rosie needed. By 2 a.m., Mac had reached the drone development labs. As he cleaned around the workbenches, he found himself studying the aircraft more closely. The composite frames were impressive examples of modern manufacturing, but something about the joint connections troubled him. Mac set down his mop and moved closer to the nearest prototype, careful not to touch anything. His years of experience reading stress patterns in metal and composite materials had developed into an almost intuitive sense for structural integrity. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Hairline fractures ran along the mounting points where the wing assemblies connected to the main fuselage. They were barely visible, hidden within the honeycomb pattern of the composite material, but Mac's trained eye caught the subtle irregularities that indicated stress concentration. He moved to the next drone. Same problem. The third aircraft showed even more pronounced fracturing, though still at a microscopic level that standard visual inspection might miss. Mac's mind raced through the implications. These weren't random manufacturing defects. They followed a pattern that suggested a fundamental design flaw in the joint system. Under normal operating conditions, the fractures would propagate slowly, potentially leading to catastrophic structural failure during flight. For medical supply drones operating in disaster zones, such failures wouldn't just mean lost equipment. They could mean lost lives, both of the people depending on those supplies and anyone on the ground when the aircraft came down. Mac stood in the quiet lab, torn between professional obligation and personal necessity. Speaking up would mean revealing that he possessed expertise far beyond what his janitor position suggested. It would mean questions about his background, his qualifications, his right to make such assessments. But staying silent could mean watching aircraft launch with fatal flaws, carrying humanitarian missions that would turn into tragedies. He thought of Rosie, asleep in their cramped apartment, depending on the health insurance this job provided. He thought of Dr. Chen, who had taken a chance on a desperate stranger. He thought of the unknown people in disaster zones who might depend on these drones for survival. Mac pulled out his phone and took careful photographs of the fracture patterns, making sure to capture the subtle stress indicators that conventional inspection might miss. He documented the specific locations and orientations of the flaws, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging the data. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made him quickly pocket his phone and return to his cleaning cart. But the footsteps passed without stopping, leaving Mac alone with his discovery and his dilemma. For the remaining hours of his shift, Mac worked with mechanical efficiency while his mind wrestled with the decision before him. By the time dawn light began filtering through the building's windows, he had reached a conclusion that satisfied neither his sense of professional responsibility nor his desperate need for security. He would document everything he had observed, but he would be careful about how and when he revealed it. If the manufacturing team discovered the flaws through their own quality control processes, the problem would be solved without risk to his position. If they didn't, if these aircraft moved toward production and deployment without proper inspection, then he would find a way to speak up. It was a compromise that left him feeling hollow, but it was the best solution he could manage given the circumstances. As Mac prepared to leave the building at 6 a.m., he passed the main lobby, where early arriving executives were already gathering for what appeared to be an important meeting. Through the glass conference room walls, he could see Dr. Chen presenting charts and diagrams to a group of stern-faced men and women in expensive suits. Mac didn't know that he was watching Dr. Chen defend her humanitarian drone project against board members who wanted to pivot toward military contracts. He didn't know that the quarterly investor demonstration was scheduled for the following week, or that the success of that demonstration would determine whether Chen Technologies continued pursuing its humanitarian mission. All Mac knew was that the woman who had given him a chance was fighting some kind of battle, and that the aircraft she believed in carried flaws that could destroy everything she had worked to build. Walking home through the awakening city, Mac carried the weight of knowledge he wasn't sure how to use. In his pocket, his phone held photographs that could save lives or cost him everything. The morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn, but Mac felt only the burden of impossible choices. Back in the 32nd floor lab, 6 prototype drones sat waiting for their next round of testing. Their hairline fractures, invisible to everyone, except a janitor who had once built bridges designed to last a century. The cracked drone frame that would drive the entire story forward had been discovered. Now Mac faced the choice that would define not just his own future, but the fate of Dr. Chen's company and the lives of everyone who would depend on aircraft that might fall from the sky. 3 nights into his new routine, Mac had established a rhythm that felt almost normal. Rosie went to bed at 8, confident that Daddy had work again. Mac arrived at Chen Technologies by 10, methodically cleaned his assigned floors, and returned home by 7 a.m. to get Rosie ready for school. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was stably, first stability they had known in months. But the fractures haunted him. Each night, Mac found himself drawn back to the drone lab, ostensibly to clean but really to study the prototype aircraft with growing concern. His photographs, reviewed and re-reviewed on his phone, confirmed what his experienced eye had detected: stress, concentration patterns that would lead to catastrophic failure under load. On Thursday night, Mac made a decision that violated every protocol Miguel had outlined. Using his security badge to access the lab after completing his official cleaning duties, he began what he told himself was a more thorough inspection. The lab's equipment inventory included magnifying devices used for quality control inspections. Mac carefully positioned one over the most pronounced fracture line, adjusting the focus until the flaw became clearly visible, a hairline crack that would be invisible to casual inspection, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. "Jesus," Mac whispered, the engineer in him finally overriding the janitor's caution. He photographed the magnified view, documenting angles and measurements with the precision that had once made him valuable to bridge construction teams. The fracture pattern told a story: inadequate stress distribution at the wing to fuselage connection points, probably caused by a resonance frequency that matched the drone's operational parameters. It was fixable. Mac's mind automatically began developing solutions reinforcement techniques that could distribute stress more effectively, welding protocols that would eliminate the weak points. But fixing it would require admitting that a night janitor possessed engineering expertise that million-dollar development teams had somehow missed. Mac was so absorbed in his analysis that he almost missed the sound of approaching footsteps. He quickly shut off the magnification equipment and grabbed his cleaning supplies, but not before noting the time. 3:17 a.m., well past when he should have finished the lab cleaning. The footsteps passed without pausing, but the close call reminded Mac how precarious his position truly was. He finished his work quickly and returned to the service areas, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. At home, Rosie was having another difficult morning. Her breathing had grown more labored over the past few days, and the rescue inhaler that should have provided relief seemed less effective. Mac watched her struggle through breakfast with growing anxiety, calculating medical costs he couldn't afford, even with his new insurance coverage. "Daddy, will you tell me about the bridges again?" Rosie asked, between careful bites of toast. It had become their routine, Mac, describing the engineering marvels he had once helped create, while Rosie listened with the rapt attention that only children could sustain. He told her about suspension cables that could hold thousands of tons, about foundations that reached deep into bedrock, about joints designed to flex with wind and weather without breaking. "The secret," Mac explained, sitting beside her at their small kitchen table, "is understanding where the stress wants to go. Metal and composites, they have natural patterns. Fight against those patterns, and eventually something breaks. Work with them, and you can build things that last forever." Rosie nodded solemnly, as if storing away wisdom for future use, like how you fix things. Mac's throat tightened. "Something like that, sweetheart." After walking Rosie to her bus stop, Mac found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. The drone fractures occupied his thoughts like an engineering puzzle that demanded solving. He spent the morning researching Chen Technologies' humanitarian mission online, learning about disaster relief protocols and the lives that could depend on reliable aircraft performance. The weight of responsibility grew heavier as he understood the scope of the company's ambitions. These weren't experimental aircraft. They were intended for deployment in earthquake zones, hurricane-ravaged islands, conflict areas where traditional aid delivery was impossible. Failure wouldn't just mean disappointment, it would mean abandoning people who had no other hope. That afternoon, Mac did something he hadn't done since losing his job at Meridian Steel. He visited his storage unit. The monthly fee was another expense he could barely afford, but Mac couldn't bring himself to sell the tools and reference materials that represented 20 years of professional growth. His welding equipment sat under dusty tarps, like artifacts from a previous life. More importantly, his technical library textbooks on metallurgy, composite materials, and structural engineering contained information he needed. Mac pulled out his copy of Advanced Composite Stress Analysis, a dense technical manual he had studied during his certification process years earlier. The mathematical formulas and stress diagrams that had once been second nature now required careful rereading, but the knowledge came back gradually. By evening, Mac had developed a preliminary solution for the drone fractures. It would require a modified welding technique that he had pioneered during bridge construction, a method for creating seamless joints in dissimilar materials. Applied to the wing fuselage connection points, it could eliminate the stress concentration that was causing the hairline cracks. But implementing the solution would require resources and authority he didn't possess. More critically, it would require revealing his true expertise to people who had hired him to empty trash bins. Mac arrived at work that night with a small toolkit hidden in his cleaning cart. Nothing obvious, just basic hand tools that could be explained as maintenance equipment, but also precision measuring devices that would allow him to take accurate readings of the fracture patterns. The building felt different as he worked through his usual routine. Each floor brought him closer to a decision that could change everything for better or worse. By the time he reached the drone lab, Mac's hands were trembling slightly with nervous energy. The lab was empty, as usual, but the aircraft seemed to mock him with their elegant design and hidden flaws. Mac set up his makeshift measuring station using supplies scrounged from the janitorial cart and tools from his personal kit. He worked with practiced efficiency, documenting stress patterns and joint specifications with the thoroughness that had once made him valuable. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears. The fractures were progressing faster than he had initially calculated. Under operational stress, the kind of loads these aircraft would face during emergency missions, catastrophic failure could occur within weeks of deployment. Mac sat back on his heels, staring at measurements that spelled potential disaster. He thought of Rosie sleeping peacefully in their apartment, trusting that Daddy's new job would keep them safe. He thought of Dr. Chen's passionate defense of humanitarian technology. He thought of people in disaster zones who might depend on aircraft that could literally fall out of the sky. The choice was no longer theoretical. These drones would soon move from prototype to production, from testing to deployment. Unless someone spoke up, the flaws would remain hidden until failure occurred in the field, with consequences that could destroy lives and end Dr. Chen's company. Mac made his decision in the quiet of the 32nd floor lab, surrounded by machines that represented humanity's best intentions and engineering's hidden perils. He would find a way to fix the problem himself, quietly and without drawing attention to his expertise. It would require careful planning and considerable risk, but it was the only path that satisfied both his professional conscience and his desperate need for security. He began by identifying the specific tools and materials he would need. The building's fabrication facilities contained everything required for his solution, though accessing them would mean violating security protocols and working far outside his official responsibilities. As dawn approached and Mac prepared to end his shift, he felt the familiar weight of engineering challenges that had once defined his professional life. For the first time in months, he was thinking like the expert he had always been, rather than the desperate job seeker he had become. The makeshift welding setup he would create, from janitorial supplies and scavenged materials, would become the artifact that drove his transformation from invisible janitor to unrecognized savior. But for now, it existed only as careful plans sketched in a notebook that had once contained bridge specifications. Mac walked home through the awakening city, carrying tools and knowledge that could save thousands of lives if he could find the courage to use them without destroying the fragile security he had finally achieved. The stack of medical bills on Mac's kitchen table had grown thicker over the weekend. Rosie's emergency clinic visit on Saturday, triggered by a wheezing episode that wouldn't respond to her rescue inhaler, had added another $400 to their mounting debt. Even with his new insurance coverage, the deductibles and copays stretched their already thin budget to the breaking point. The specialist wants to see her again next week, Mac explained to Mrs. Rodriguez, who had agreed to watch Rosie during his Monday night shift. Her asthma is getting worse, and the current medication isn't effective enough. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded with the understanding of someone who had raised 5 children of her own. That girl needs stability, Mac. Medical care, yes, but also the security of knowing her father isn't carrying the world on his shoulders. If only she knew how literally true that had become. Mac arrived at Chen Technologies that Monday night with more than cleaning supplies in his cart. Hidden beneath the industrial-grade trash bags and floor polish were precision tools borrowed from his storage unit, along with composite repair materials he had purchased with money earmarked for groceries. The first 3 hours of his shift preceded normally methodical cleaning of offices and corridors, while he mentally rehearsed the modifications he planned to attempt. But as he approached the drone lab, Mac's resolve wavered. What he was contemplating went far beyond violating company policy. It was essentially unauthorized engineering work on multi-million-dollar prototypes. The rational part of his mind catalogued everything he could lose: his job, his insurance coverage, possibly even criminal charges for property damage. But his engineer's conscience proved stronger than his caution. Mac set up his improvised workstation in a storage alcove adjacent to the main lab, using cleaning supplies to conceal his real tools. His plan was simple in concept but delicate in execution. Create reinforcing joints that would distribute stress away from the fracture points using a modified welding technique that would be invisible to casual inspection. Working by the light of a small LED flashlight, Mac began fabricating micro-reinforcements from scrap composite material found in the lab's waste bins. His hands moved with the muscle memory of 20 years' experience, cutting and shaping with precision that had once built bridges designed to last centuries. The first repair took him 45 minutes, a hairline welding job that strengthened the wing fuselage connection without altering the drone's external appearance. Mac stepped back to examine his work, using a magnifying glass to verify that the stress concentration had been eliminated. It was good work. Better than good, it was the kind of innovative solution that had once made him valuable to construction teams. The reinforcement was nearly invisible but structurally sound, distributing load forces in a way that eliminated the fracture-prone weak points. Mac moved to the second prototype, then the third, working with growing confidence as his skills returned. Each repair was slightly different, customized to the specific stress patterns he had identified. By 4 a.m., he had reinforced 4 of the 6 aircraft. The sound of voices in the main corridor froze Mac mid-weld. He quickly shut off his equipment and concealed his tools, returning to his official cleaning duties just as 2 security guards made their rounds. They nodded politely as they passed, noting nothing unusual about a janitor working late. After they left, Mac allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. For the first time in months, he had used his real skills to solve a meaningful problem. The aircraft were now structurally sound, capable of performing their humanitarian missions without the risk of catastrophic failure. But his satisfaction was short-lived. The next morning brought news that would complicate everything. "Big week coming up," Miguel Santos mentioned during Mac's Tuesday evening briefing. "The quarterly investor demonstration is Friday. Dr. Chen's presenting the humanitarian drone project to potential funders. There's going to be a live test flight-on of the prototypes carrying simulated medical supplies." Mac's blood turned cold. A live demonstration meant public attention, media coverage, and detailed inspection of the aircraft. His modifications, while structurally sound, might not survive close scrutiny by the engineering team. "Which prototype are they using?" Mac asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Unit 4, I think. The one with the blue trim. Dr. Chen's been working on it, personally calibrating the navigation systems, fine-tuning the payload distribution." Unit 4. Mac had reinforced that aircraft 2 nights earlier, but his modifications were concentrated on structural elements that might become visible during pre-flight inspection. If the engineering team discovered unauthorized alterations, the investigation would lead directly back to the night maintenance crew. Mac spent his Tuesday shift in a state of controlled anxiety, methodically completing his cleaning duties, while his mind raced through possible scenarios. he could remove his modifications before the demonstration, returning the aircraft to their original flawed state. He could find a way to anonymously alert the engineering team to the fractures, hoping they would discover and address the problems through official channels. Or he could trust that his repairs were good enough to pass inspection and pray that no one looked too closely. Wednesday brought a new complication. As Mac worked through his routine cleaning of the executive floors, he overheard a heated conversation coming from Dr. Chen's office. "The board is losing confidence, Aurelia," a man's voice was saying. "The military contracts would guarantee profitability. This humanitarian project is admirable, but admirable doesn't pay shareholders." "The humanitarian applications are revolutionary," Dr. Chen replied, her voice tight with frustration. "We're talking about saving lives in disaster zones, delivering medical supplies to areas no other aircraft can reach. That has value beyond quarterly profits. Tell that to the investors," the man responded. "Friday's demonstration needs to be flawless. Any problems, any hint of technical difficulties, and the board will have the excuse they need to force a strategic pivot." Mac lingered outside the office, pretending to clean the same section of corridor while he absorbed the implications. Dr. Chen's entire vision for her company hung in the balance of Friday's demonstration. The aircraft he had secretly repaired would determine not just the success of a business presentation, but the future direction of humanitarian technology. Thursday night's shift carried an electric tension that Mac felt in every routine task. Tomorrow would bring the live demonstration that could vindicate Dr. Chen's vision or destroy it. The prototype aircraft sat in the lab like sleeping giants, their hidden modifications representing either salvation or sabotage. Mac made his final rounds through the drone lab with particular attention to Unit 4. His reinforcements were invisible to casual inspection, integrated seamlessly into the aircraft's existing structure. But under the kind of detailed pre-flight checks that preceded public demonstrations, they might be discovered. As he cleaned around the workbenches, Mac noticed something that made his heart rate spike. Chalk marks on the lab floor, indicating where additional inspection equipment would be positioned for Friday's preparation. The marks suggested a level of scrutiny that would examine every component, every joint, every surface. Standing in the quiet lab surrounded by his secret work, Mac faced the possibility that his attempt to prevent disaster might create a different kind of catastrophe. If his modifications were discovered, the resulting investigation would destroy not just his own precarious position, but potentially Dr. Chen's company as well. Yet removing the reinforcements would return the aircraft to their original flawed state, virtually guaranteeing structural failure during the high-stress demonstration flight. Mac made his choice in the early hours of Friday morning, as the city began to wake and the most important day in Chen Technologies' recent history approached. He would leave his modifications in place and trust that his engineering skills were sufficient to withstand scrutiny. The anonymous janitor fix that would soon spread through the engineering department was about to be put to its ultimate test. In a few hours, Unit 4 would either vindicate Mac's expertise or expose him as an imposter who had overstepped every boundary of his position. Walking home through the dawn-lit streets, Mac carried the weight of consequences he couldn't control. Somewhere in the corporate tower behind him, Dr. Chen was preparing for a demonstration that would define her company's future. Neither of them knew that their fates had become inextricably linked by hairline fractures and midnight repairs, by desperate necessity and professional pride. The medical bills waiting on Mac's kitchen table represented his daughter's immediate needs. But the aircraft sleeping in the 32nd floor lab carried the hopes of disaster victims around the world and the career of a woman who had taken a chance on a desperate stranger. By evening, both Mac's secret and Dr. Chen's company would face judgment that could change everything. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that September often brought to Seattle, but for MacAllister, the day felt wrapped in fog. He had managed only 3 hours of sleep after his Thursday night shift, his mind churning through every possible outcome of the demonstration that would begin in just 6 hours. Rosie's morning routine provided a welcome distraction from his anxiety. She chatted about her art project while Mac helped her with breakfast, her innocent enthusiasm a reminder of what truly mattered. But even Rosie's bright spirits couldn't completely mask the labored quality of her breathing. "Daddy, you look worried," she observed with the unsettling perceptiveness that children sometimes displayed. "Is everything okay at your job?" Mac managed a smile that felt more genuine than he expected. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a big day at work, but I'll be home tonight, and we can watch that movie you picked out." After seeing Rosie off to school, Mac found himself unable to settle into his usual pre-shift rest. Instead, he walked the 6 miles to Chen Technologies, arriving hours before his shift began. He told himself it was curiosity about the demonstration preparations, but deeper motivations drove his restless energy. The building buzzed with unusual activity for a Friday afternoon. Catering trucks delivered equipment for what appeared to be an elaborate reception. Media vans gathered in the parking area, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like technological flowers seeking signal. Executive assistants hurried through the lobby, carrying presentation materials and tablet computers. Mac positioned himself at a coffee shop across the street, nursing a cup he couldn't afford, while watching the controlled chaos of preparation. Through the building's glass walls, he could see technicians setting up equipment in the main conference room. Somewhere inside that corporate hive, Unit 4 was being prepared for its moment of truth. At 2 p.m., Mac witnessed Dr. Chen emerging from the building in conversation with a tall man in an expensive suit. Even from a distance, her body language suggested tension, shoulders squared, gestures controlled but emphatic. The man beside her nodded with the patient expression of someone accustomed to managing difficult personalities. Mac didn't know he was watching Dr. Chen's final conversation with the board chairman before the demonstration. He couldn't hear the ultimatum being delivered, flawless performance or forced strategic pivot toward military contracts, but he could see the weight of expectation in her posture as she returned to the building. By 4 p.m., Mac couldn't delay any longer. His shift didn't begin until 10 p.m., but the demonstration would be over. By then his work either vindicated or exposed, his position either secure or terminated. He needed to be inside the building, even if it meant violating protocol. Mac approached the service entrance where he had first pleaded for employment just 2 weeks earlier. The security guard on duty, Johnson, who worked the swing shift, recognized him with a friendly nod. "Early tonight, Mac? Miguel asked me to help with some special cleaning before the demonstration." Mac lied smoothly. "Extra hands for the big event." Johnson waved him through without question, the kind of casual trust that Mac felt like acid in his stomach. He was accumulating deceptions faster than he could justify them, each small violation of protocol building toward a reckoning he couldn't avoid. The building's interior reflected the controlled tension of high-stakes preparation. Mac made his way to the service areas, donning his cleaning uniform and collecting a cart that would provide cover for his real mission, observing the final preparations for Unit 4's demonstration. The 32nd floor hummed with activity that was both fascinating and terrifying to watch. Engineering technicians surrounded Unit 4 with diagnostic equipment, running systems checks that would have been routine for any aircraft, but felt like examinations of Mac's secret work. Mac positioned himself in an adjacent corridor, ostensibly cleaning baseboards, while actually monitoring the inspection process through the lab's glass walls. His heart rate spiked each time a technician examined the wing fuselage connection points where his modifications were concentrated. Dr. Lead Engineer Sarah Voss directed the inspection with the methodical precision that had made her Chen Technologies' most trusted technical expert. Mac watched her run diagnostic scans over every surface, checking stress points with equipment sensitive enough to detect microscopic flaws. "Structural integrity looks excellent," Voss announced to her team. "Better than our initial projections, actually. The composite joints are showing optimal stress distribution." Mac's knees nearly buckled with relief. His modifications weren't just undetected, they were improving the aircraft's performance metrics beyond original specifications. But his relief was premature. "That's interesting," Voss continued, leaning closer to examine one of the connection points. "The stress patterns here are different from our computer models, more efficient actually. Run a detailed scan on this section." Mac felt sweat gathering between his shoulder blades as additional equipment was positioned around Unit 4. The level of scrutiny was exactly what he had feared, detailed enough to reveal that someone had performed unauthorized modifications. The scanning process took 45 minutes that felt like hours. Mac maintained his cleaning routine with mechanical precision, while his future hung in the balance just beyond the glass walls. Discovery would mean more than job loss. It could mean criminal charges for tampering with corporate property. "I'm seeing micro-welding patterns that aren't in our fabrication records," one technician reported. "The work is excellent. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, but it's not documented anywhere in our files." Dr. Voss studied the scan results with growing confusion. "The modifications are structurally sound. Actually, they're brilliant. They eliminate stress concentration points we didn't even know existed. But who could have done work this sophisticated without authorization?" Mac forced himself to continue cleaning while the investigation intensified around Unit 4. Additional engineers arrived to examine the mysterious modifications, their voices carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. "This is master-level work," one engineer admitted. "The technique is beyond anything in our standard protocols. But if someone made unauthorized changes to a prototype aircraft, the implications hung unspoken in the air. Corporate security would be called. Access logs would be reviewed. The investigation would inevitably lead to the night maintenance crew and the new janitor who had been working alone in the labs. Mac made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of fleeing, he moved closer to the lab entrance, positioning himself where he could overhear more of the technical discussion. If his work was about to be exposed, he wanted to understand exactly how his modifications would be judged. "The welding technique is unlike anything I've seen, Doctor," Voss was saying. "It's almost like someone took our standard protocols and evolved them, improved them in ways that suggest decades of experience with composite stress analysis. Could this be related to the anonymous suggestions we've been receiving?" another engineer asked. "Someone's been leaving detailed technical notes about various projects, always accurate, always helpful, but never signed." Mac's eyes widened. He hadn't been leaving notes, but apparently someone else had been making unofficial contributions to Chen Technologies' engineering challenges. The revelation suggested that his own unauthorized modifications might be part of a larger pattern of mysterious assistance. Dr. Voss stepped back from the aircraft, her expression thoughtful. "The demonstration begins in 90 minutes. These modifications don't compromise the aircraft's safety, they improve it. We proceed as planned, but I want a full investigation into who's been making these changes." As the engineering team shifted their focus to final systems checks, Mac retreated to a supply closet to steady his nerves. His modifications had passed inspection, not just as acceptable, but as improvements to the original design. The anonymous janitor fix had earned professional admiration from experts who would never have imagined that their mystery helper was emptying their trash bins each night. But the investigation Dr. Voss had ordered would examine security badge scanner logs, digital records that would reveal Mac's after-hours presence in restricted areas. His badge, number 2847, had been used to access the labs during times when no maintenance work was scheduled. Mac pulled out his security badge, studying the magnetic strip that contained his digital identity within Chen Technologies' system. Somewhere in the building's computer servers, that badge had left an electronic trail leading directly to him. The demonstration would begin in less than 2 hours. Unit 4 would either perform flawlessly, vindicating both Dr. Chen's vision and Mac's secret contributions, or suffer the kind of catastrophic failure that would destroy both their futures. But regardless of the aircraft's performance, Mac's unauthorized presence in the labs had been recorded by systems designed to track every movement within the building. The badge scanner logs that would soon expose his nighttime activities represented evidence that no amount of successful demonstration could erase. Walking through the building's corridors as preparation continued around him, Mac carried the weight of approaching revelation. In a few hours, he would either be celebrated as an anonymous savior or arrested as a corporate saboteur. The digital trail of his security badge access would determine which outcome awaited him. The Chen Technologies conference room had been transformed into a showcase of corporate ambition. 200 investors, board members, and media representatives filled theater-style seating, arranged to face floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the building's rooftop landing pad. Unit 4 sat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, its composite frame reflecting the kind of technological sophistication that inspired both confidence and substantial financial investment. Mac watched the gathering from a service corridor, his janitor's uniform making him invisible among the catering staff who moved efficiently through the crowd. Dr. Chen stood at a podium, positioned to command the room's attention. Her presentation materials displayed on screens that faced both the live audience and remote viewers, joining via video conference. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Chen began, her voice carrying the controlled confidence that had built Chen Technologies from startup to industry leader. "Today marks a pivotal moment in humanitarian technology. The aircraft you see behind me represents 5 years of development and the potential to save thousands of lives in disaster zones worldwide." Mac felt a surreal disconnection from the polished presentation. The woman speaking about revolutionary technology had no idea that a desperate janitor had secretly modified her prototype aircraft. The investors evaluating multi-million-dollar opportunities couldn't imagine that their potential returns depended partly on unauthorized midnight repairs. "Our humanitarian drones can deliver medical supplies to areas traditional aircraft cannot reach," Dr. Chen continued, clicking through slides that showed theoretical deployment scenarios. Earthquake zones with damaged infrastructure, hurricane-ravaged islands cut off from supply lines, conflict areas where ground transportation is impossible. Mac's attention shifted between Dr. Chen's presentation and his phone, where Mrs. Rodriguez had texted an update about Rosie's condition. His daughter's wheezing had worsened during the school day, requiring a visit to the nurse's office and an early pickup. The rescue inhaler that should have provided relief was becoming less effective, a progression that worried both Mac and Rosie's pediatrician. The stress analysis shows optimal performance under extreme weather conditions. Dr. Chen was explaining, gesturing toward technical diagrams that Mac could interpret better than most of the investors in the audience. "Our composite frame design provides unprecedented strength-to-weight ratios." Mac knew those stress analysis reports were based on his modifications, though Dr. Chen didn't realize it. His unauthorized reinforcements had eliminated the fracture points that would have made the demonstration a catastrophe rather than a triumph. The presentation moved toward its climax as Dr. Chen introduced the live flight demonstration. Unit 4 will now perform a simulated emergency supply run, carrying medical equipment equivalent to what disaster relief teams require in the field. Mac watched Dr. Voss and her engineering team conduct final pre-flight checks through the conference room windows. Their movements suggested routine confidence, but Mac could see the subtle signs of unusual attention. Extra time spent examining the connection points where his modifications were concentrated. "Dr. Chen," called out a voice from the audience. Man Mac recognized as board chairman Robert Winters from the company website photos. "The board remains concerned about the commercial viability of humanitarian applications. Military contracts would provide more reliable revenue streams." Dr. Chen's pause lasted only a fraction of a second, but Mac caught the tightness around her eyes that suggested this was not an unexpected challenge. "Mr. Winters, today's demonstration will show that humanitarian technology can achieve the performance standards that make military applications possible, while serving purposes that align with our company's founding vision." It was a diplomatic non-answer that acknowledged the political pressures without conceding the argument. Mac understood that he was watching more than a technical demonstration. He was witnessing a battle for the soul of Dr. Chen's company. The actual flight test began 20 minutes later. Unit 4 lifted off with the smooth precision that characterized well-engineered aircraft, its rotors generating the distinctive whir of advanced drone technology. Mac found himself holding his breath as the aircraft executed maneuvers designed to showcase its stability and payload capacity. Beautiful flight characteristics, Dr. Voss reported through the intercom system. All systems nominal, structural integrity excellent throughout the test sequence. Mac felt a complex mixture of pride and terror as his secret modifications performed flawlessly under public scrutiny. The aircraft that might have suffered catastrophic failure was instead demonstrating capabilities that exceeded original specifications. But his satisfaction was interrupted by an announcement that made his blood run cold. "Dr. Chen," came Dr. Voss's voice over the intercom. "We need to discuss some unusual findings in the pre-flight inspection. There are structural modifications that weren't in our fabrication records." The conference room fell silent, except for the distant sound of Unit 4's rotors as it completed its demonstration flight. Mac watched Dr. Chen's expression shift from confident presenter to concerned engineer as the implications registered. "The modifications are actually improvements," Dr. Voss continued. "Whoever made them understood our design better than we did. But they were performed without authorization, possibly during off-hours access to the lab facilities." Mac felt the walls closing in as Dr. Chen's eyes swept the conference room, perhaps wondering if their mystery modifier was among the gathered crowd. The investigation that would examine security logs and badge access records had just begun in front of 200 witnesses. "We'll address those concerns after the demonstration," Dr. Chen replied smoothly, but Mac could hear the underlying tension in her voice. Unit 4 completed its flight test with textbook precision, landing on the rooftop pad to enthusiastic applause from investors who had witnessed exactly the kind of performance that justified their confidence. But Mac knew the real reckoning was just beginning. As the formal presentation concluded and attendees moved toward the reception area, Mac made his way to the building's lower levels. His shift didn't officially begin for another 4 hours, but he needed to collect his personal items before the inevitable investigation reached his locker. The service areas felt different, now less like refuge and more like a trap waiting to spring. Mac's security badge, which had provided access to restricted areas during his unauthorized modifications, now felt like evidence of criminal activity rather than legitimate employment. His phone buzzed with another text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Rosie asking when Daddy coming home. Breathing better but still worried about her." Mac stared at the message, weighing his daughter's immediate needs against the approaching storm of corporate investigation. Rosie's rescue inhaler was nearly empty, and refilling it required the insurance coverage that depended on his continued employment. But his employment was about to end with revelations that could lead to criminal charges. Standing in the building's basement service area, surrounded by the tools and supplies that had provided him with honest work for exactly 2 weeks, Mac faced the consequences of choices made in desperation. His modifications had saved Unit 4 from catastrophic failure, but they had also created an electronic trail that would soon expose him as the mysterious midnight engineer. The evening news would report Chen Technologies' successful demonstration as a triumph of humanitarian innovation. Investors would commit funding based on performance they had witnessed firsthand. Dr. Chen's vision for disaster relief technology would receive the validation she needed to resist board pressure toward military applications. But none of those victories would protect Mac from the investigation that Dr. Voss had already begun. Somewhere in the building's security systems, badge scanner logs were waiting to reveal that janitor number 2847 had been accessing restricted areas during unauthorized hours. Mac pulled his daughter's rescue inhaler from his pocket, nearly empty now, representing medication they couldn't afford to replace without insurance coverage. In a few hours, his secret would be exposed and his employment terminated. Rosie would lose her health coverage just as her condition was worsening. The successful demonstration upstairs represented everything Mac had hoped to protect. Dr. Chen's humanitarian mission, the lives that would be saved by reliable aircraft, and the integrity of engineering work that mattered. But success couldn't shield him from the consequences of the methods he had used to achieve it. Walking through the service corridors where he had spent the happiest work hours he had known in months, Mac carried the weight of approaching judgment. His Rosie's inhaler, nearly empty but still providing the medication that kept her breathing, represented both his motivation and what he stood to lose when the investigation revealed his identity. The artifact that symbolized his daughter's fragility and his own desperation would soon be joined by the security badge that had made him both savior and saboteur in equal measure. Dr. Aurelia Chen stood in her corner office 43 floors above the city, staring at printouts that would change everything she thought she knew about her company's mysterious midnight engineer. The security badge access logs, spread across her mahogany desk, told a story that seemed impossible. Badge 2847, assigned to maintenance worker Ethan MacAllister, had accessed restricted lab areas during 17 unauthorized visits over the past 2 weeks. The name meant nothing to her initially. Chen Technologies employed over 800 people across multiple divisions, but when her assistant had pulled the employment file, Dr. Chen found herself staring at a photograph that sparked immediate recognition, the desperate man who had pleaded for work outside the service entrance. "This can't be right," she murmured, studying Mac's hiring paperwork. According to his application, he had listed his previous experience as general maintenance and janitorial services. No mention of engineering background, no technical certifications. No indication that he possessed the expertise necessary to improve aircraft designs that had challenged her best engineers. Dr. Chen reached for her secure phone and dialed an extension she rarely used. "Security, this is Dr. Chen. I need you to quietly locate maintenance worker Ethan MacAllister. Don't apprehend him, just tell me where he is." While waiting for the response, Dr. Chen opened her laptop and began searching for information about the man she had hired on impulse. A deeper background check revealed layers of deception that made her question everything about their encounter. The search results painted a picture that contradicted everything Mac had told her. Ethan MacAllister wasn't a career janitor looking for steady work. He was a master welder with 20 years of experience in advanced structural engineering. His specialty had been bridge construction, specifically the development of innovative welding techniques for composite and steel joint systems. "Jesus," Dr. Chen whispered as she read through Mac's professional history. His work at Meridian Steel had included revolutionary protocols for stress distribution in dissimilar material joints, exactly the kind of expertise required to solve the fracture problems that had been discovered in Unit 4. But the most shocking revelation came when Dr. Chen found Mac's portfolio of bridge designs archived in professional engineering databases. The Cascade River Bridge, completed 3 years earlier, featured joint systems that were nearly identical to the modifications found in Unit 4. Mac hadn't just randomly improved, her aircraft had applied techniques that represented the cutting edge of structural engineering. Dr. Chen's secure phone buzzed. "Dr. Chen? Security here. MacAllister is in Building C, Sublevel 2. He appears to be cleaning his equipment locker." "Don't approach him yet," Dr. Chen instructed. "I'm coming down." The elevator ride to the service levels gave Dr. Chen time to process the implications of what she had discovered. The man she had hired as an act of charity was actually overqualified for most positions in her company. His desperate plea for any job had been literal truth. He was willing to work as a janitor, despite possessing expertise that could command 6-figure salaries. But why? What circumstances had reduced a master engineer to begging for maintenance work? Dr. Chen found the answer in medical billing records that Mac's background check had revealed. His wife Sarah had died of cancer 18 months earlier, after a battle that had consumed their savings and left them deeply in debt. Rosie's ongoing asthma treatment required expensive medications and specialist care. When Meridian Steel closed due to overseas competition, Mac had been unable to find engineering work in a contracting market. The financial pressure had forced him to accept any employment that provided health insurance for his daughter. His expertise in structural engineering was irrelevant if no one would hire him for positions that matched his qualifications. Dr. Chen descended to sub-level 2 with a mixture of anger and admiration that she couldn't quite reconcile. Mac had lied about his background, violated security protocols, and performed unauthorized modifications to multi-million-dollar equipment. But he had also solved engineering problems that her trained staff had missed, potentially saving lives and certainly improving her aircraft beyond original specifications. She found Mac methodically packing personal items from a maintenance locker, his movements careful and deliberate. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from surprise to resignation as he recognized her. "Dr. Chen," Mac said quietly, "I was going to turn in my badge and keys before my shift started. Were you planning to tell me about your real background?" Dr. Chen asked, holding up the printouts that documented his professional history. "Or were you going to let me continue believing you were just a janitor who happened to be handy with aircraft modifications?" Mac's shoulders sagged with the weight of inevitable confession. "I needed the job, Mum, for my daughter. She has asthma, and the medical bills." He caught himself, straightening with the dignity she remembered from their first encounter. "I should have been honest about my qualifications." "Your qualifications?" Dr. Chen's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "Mac, you designed the stress distribution system for the Cascade River Bridge. Your welding innovations are used in infrastructure projects across 3 states. You're not overqualified for janitorial work, you're overqualified for most engineering positions in my company." Mac met her gaze directly, the same quiet dignity that had prompted her to hire him still evident, despite the circumstances. "None of that matters if no one will hire you for those positions. I applied for engineering jobs for 8 months, 237 applications, 18 interviews, 0 offers." The simple statement carried more weight than elaborate explanations. Dr. Chen understood the brutal mathematics of unemployment in a contracting industry, the way expertise became irrelevant when too many qualified candidates competed for too few positions. "So you took a janitorial job and secretly fixed problems that my engineering team couldn't solve," Dr. Chen said. "I saw the fractures in the composite joints," Mac replied. "Unit 4 and the others, they had stress concentration points that would have led to catastrophic failure under operational loads. I couldn't just ignore it." Dr. Chen studied the man who had become both an asset and a liability to her company. "You violated security protocols, performed unauthorized modifications to prototype aircraft, lied on your employment application." "Yes, ma'am. And in the process, you solved engineering problems that saved my company from potential disaster and improved our aircraft beyond original specifications." Mac nodded silently, understanding that his professional contributions couldn't erase the violations of trust and protocol that had made them possible. Dr. Chen made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'm not firing you, Mac, but I'm not keeping you as a janitor either." Mac's expression shifted from resignation to confusion. "Ma'am?" "Monday morning, you report to Dr. Voss in engineering development. We're creating a new position, Senior Innovation Consultant. Your job will be to identify problems that our standard review processes miss and develop solutions that exceed conventional approaches." "Dr. Chen, I can't. The salary is $95,000 annually, plus full medical benefits that will cover your daughter's treatment." Chen continued, overriding his protests. "Your title will be Senior Innovation Consultant, but your real job is to be the expert we didn't know we needed." Mac stared at her with an expression that cycled through disbelief, gratitude, and lingering confusion. "Why?" "Because results matter more than methods," Dr. Chen replied. Because my aircraft are better because of your work. Because I'd rather have you solving problems from inside my company than watching you fix things from the shadows." She paused, studying Mac's face as her offer registered. "Also because I remember what it feels like to be told your expertise doesn't matter. I started this company because Boeing wouldn't listen to my ideas about humanitarian applications for aerospace technology. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who are desperate enough to ignore conventional boundaries." Mac's original bridge design portfolio, which Dr. Chen now carried in a manila folder, represented the revelation that had changed everything. The artifact that exposed his true expertise also revealed the irony of his situation, a master engineer reduced to begging for janitorial work not because he lacked skills, but because a contracting industry had no place for his talents. "Your daughter needs stability," Dr. Chen continued. "Your family needs security. My company needs your expertise. This arrangement serves everyone's interests." Mac's voice was barely above a whisper. "Rosie's inhaler is almost empty. The insurance coverage will begin immediately," Dr. Chen assured him. "Your daughter's medical care is now a company priority." Standing in the basement service area where Mac had spent 2 weeks hiding his true capabilities, Dr. Chen extended her hand in a gesture that acknowledged both his expertise and his humanity. "Welcome to Chen Technologies' engineering team, Mac. Your real job starts Monday." Mac shook her hand with the firm grip of someone accepting not just employment, but the restoration of professional identity. The desperate stranger who had pleaded for any work had become the expert consultant who would help guide humanitarian technology toward its full potential. The bridge designs that had once been hidden in storage were about to become the foundation for innovations that could save lives around the world. The weekend that followed, Dr. Chen's revelation passed in a blur of medical appointments and emotional recalibration that left Mac feeling as though he had stepped into someone else's life. Saturday morning brought Rosie's long-delayed visit to the pediatric pulmonologist, Dr. Amanda Foster, whose expertise had been financially out of reach for months. "Her condition is definitely manageable with the right treatment protocol," Dr. Foster explained, reviewing chest x-rays that showed improvement even from the previous week. "The chronic inflammation has been undertreated, but we can address that with a combination therapy that should give her much better control." Mac listened to medical terminology that had once terrified him with costs they couldn't afford. Now, with comprehensive insurance coverage that would begin Monday, those same treatments represented hope rather than financial catastrophe. "Daddy, does this mean I can play soccer again?" Rosie asked, her 7-year-old optimism undaunted by months of breathing difficulties. "We'll see what Dr. Foster says," Mac replied, but privately he felt the first stirrings of genuine hope he had experienced since Sarah's death. Sunday afternoon found Mac in his storage unit, carefully packing the engineering references and tools he would need for his new position. The bridge design portfolio that had exposed his true expertise now seemed like artifacts from a previous life evidence of capabilities he had almost forgotten he possessed. His phone rang as he loaded textbooks on composite stress analysis into a cardboard box. Dr. Chen's number appeared on the screen, unexpected on a weekend. "Mac, I'm sorry to call you at home, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The urgency in her voice triggered the anxiety that had become Mac's default emotional state over the past months. "What's wrong?" "The board called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Robert Winters has convinced 3 other members that the mysterious aircraft modifications represent a security breach that requires immediate investigation. They're demanding that I identify and terminate whoever made unauthorized changes to our prototypes." Mac felt his newly stable world beginning to shift again. "Dr. Chen, I understand if you need to." "I'm not throwing you under the bus, Mac," Dr. Chen interrupted, "but I need you to be prepared for a fight. Winters wants to use this situation to force a pivot toward military contracts. He's arguing that security breaches prove our humanitarian focus makes us vulnerable to industrial espionage." The political implications were beyond Mac's experience, but he understood the basic dynamic. His unauthorized modifications had become ammunition in a corporate power struggle that could determine Chen Technologies' future direction. "What do you need me to do?" Mac asked. "Be ready to defend your work publicly," Dr. Chen replied. "Tomorrow's board meeting will include major investors and media representatives. If we're going to fight Winter's narrative, we need to show that your modifications represent innovation, not security, vulnerability." Monday morning arrived with the kind of Seattle rain that seemed to match the gravity of the day ahead. Mac arrived at Chen Technologies 2 hours early, wearing his best interview suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained documentation of his bridge engineering work. The building felt different as he entered through the main lobby, rather than the service entrance where his employment had begun. Executive assistants who had never noticed him during his janitorial shifts now acknowledged him with the polite recognition accorded to senior staff. Dr. Voss met him in the engineering department conference room, where she had assembled a comprehensive presentation about the aircraft modifications. Her manner was professional but warm, suggesting that she harbored no resentment about Mac's deceptive employment circumstances. "Your welding technique is genuinely innovative," Dr. Voss began, displaying microscopic images of Mac's joint reinforcements. "The stress distribution is more efficient than anything in our standard protocols. We've been studying your methods all weekend." Mac reviewed the technical analysis with growing confidence. His midnight modifications had not only prevented catastrophic failure, but had actually improved the aircraft's performance beyond original design specifications. "The board will want to understand how an unauthorized janitor possessed the expertise to outperform our engineering team," Dr. Voss continued. "Are you prepared to explain your background?" "Yes, ma'am," Mac replied, though privately he wondered if his explanation would sound credible to people who moved in worlds where desperation rarely forced overqualification into menial employment. The boardroom on the 42nd floor commanded a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, its mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Mac's monthly rent. Board members, investors, and media representatives filled the space with the kind of subdued energy that preceded significant corporate decisions. Mac took his assigned seat near Dr. Chen, acutely aware that his presence represented either vindication of her hiring practices or evidence of her poor judgment. The live demonstration script that Dr. Chen had prepared for the meeting represented their shared attempt to frame his story as innovation rather than insubordination. Robert Winters called the meeting to order with the gravitas of someone accustomed to wielding authority over others' professional destinies. His opening remarks painted Mac's modifications as a security breach that demonstrated the dangers of Chen Technologies' current operational approach. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address a serious breach of corporate security," Winters began, his voice carrying the measured authority that had built his reputation in aerospace management. Unauthorized modifications were made to prototype aircraft by someone with access to restricted facilities. This represents exactly the kind of vulnerability that makes our current humanitarian focus a liability rather than an asset. Dr. Chen responded with her own prepared remarks, positioning Mac's work as evidence of the innovative culture that made Chen Technologies valuable to investors seeking breakthrough technology rather than conventional military applications. "Mr. Winter's security concerns are understandable," Dr. Chen acknowledged, "but they miss the larger significance of what happened. Our company culture attracted and empowered an expert whose contributions improved our aircraft beyond original specifications. That's not a security breach. That's exactly the kind of innovation that creates competitive advantage." The formal presentations concluded, leaving Mac to face direct questioning from board members who would determine both his future and the direction of Dr. Chen's company. The live broadcast equipment that surrounded the boardroom table meant that his explanation would be recorded for posterity, becoming either the foundation of his professional rehabilitation or evidence of his corporate deception. Winters leaned forward in his chair, studying Mac with the calculating expression of someone preparing to expose weakness. "Mr. MacAllister, you falsified your employment application, violated security protocols, and performed unauthorized modifications to multi-million-dollar equipment. How do you justify actions that would constitute criminal behavior in most corporate environments?" Mac had spent the weekend preparing for exactly this question, but facing it in the corporate boardroom felt like standing before a tribunal that would judge not just his actions, but his worth as a human being. "Mr. Winters, everything you've said is factually accurate," Mac replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I lied on my application because 8 months of honest applications hadn't resulted in employment that could provide health insurance for my daughter. I violated security protocols because I saw structural flaws that could have caused catastrophic failure and loss of life. I performed unauthorized modifications because my professional conscience wouldn't allow me to stay silent when I knew how to prevent disaster." The boardroom fell silent except for the quiet hum of recording equipment and the distant sound of rain against the windows. Mac continued, drawing on reserves of dignity that had sustained him through months of rejection and desperation. "I'm not proud of the deception, but I'm not ashamed of the work. Unit 4 is safer because of my modifications. The people who will depend on these aircraft for medical supplies in disaster zones are safer because someone was willing to break protocol to prevent failures that could have cost lives." Mac reached for the leather portfolio beside his chair, extracting documentation that represented 20 years of professional achievement. "These are my bridge designs, Mr. Winters. Infrastructure that carries thousands of people every day, built using techniques I developed to make joint systems stronger and more resilient, the same techniques I applied to Dr. Chen's aircraft." He slid the portfolio across the mahogany table, watching Winters examine designs that proved Mac's expertise was legitimate rather than fraudulent. "I didn't take this job to sabotage Chen Technologies," Mac concluded. "I took it because my daughter needs medical insurance, and I was willing to do anything, even empty trash binsto provide it. The modifications happened because I couldn't watch aircraft go into production with flaws that would kill people." The weight of judgment pressed down on the boardroom as Mac finished his explanation. His professional vindication depended not just on the technical merit of his work, but on the board's willingness to value desperate expertise over conventional employment protocols. The live demonstration script that would determine Chen Technologies' future and Mac's place within it waited for a response that could transform a janitor's midnight repairs into the foundation of a corporate revolution. The silence that followed Mac's explanation stretched across the boardroom like a held breath. Robert Winters studied the bridge design portfolio with the careful attention of someone looking for ammunition rather than understanding. Around the mahogany table, board members exchanged glances that suggested private conversations and predetermined positions. Dr. Chen watched the dynamics with growing tension, recognizing that Mac's future and her own authority within the company hung in the balance of political calculations that had little to do with engineering merit. "Mr. MacAllister's personal circumstances are sympathetic," Winters said finally, closing the portfolio with deliberate emphasis. "But corporate security cannot be compromised by individual hardship, however compelling. We have protocols for a reason." Board member Margaret Hewitt, whose investment firm held substantial Chen Technologies equity, leaned forward with the expression of someone about to deliver an uncomfortable truth. "Robert raises valid concerns about precedent. If we excuse unauthorized modification 7 beneficial ones, we create a culture where employees feel entitled to violate security protocols whenever they believe their expertise justifies it." Mac felt the weight of corporate judgment bearing down on him, but before he could respond, Dr. Chen stood and moved toward the presentation screen that dominated one wall of the boardroom. "With respect, Margaret, I think we're approaching this from the wrong perspective," Dr. Chen said, activating the display system. The question isn't whether Mac violated protocol, clearly did. The question is whether Chen Technologies is the kind of company that punishes innovation or embraces it. The screen filled with technical diagrams that showed Unit 4's performance improvements, side-by-side comparisons that demonstrated how Mac's modifications had exceeded original design specifications. These modifications didn't just prevent structural failure, Dr. Chen continued. They improved our aircraft's performance by 18%. 18% better stress distribution, 18% more reliable under extreme conditions, 18% more likely to complete humanitarian missions successfully. She clicked to the next slide, showing market projections that painted Mac's innovations in terms that board members could understand. Competitive advantage measured in dollars and market share. Military contractors will reverse engineer our improvements within 6 months of deployment, Dr. Chen explained. But humanitarian applications give us first mover advantage in markets that our competitors haven't prioritized. Mac's innovations make us leaders in technology that saves lives rather than followers in technology that takes them. Mac watched the presentation with growing amazement as Dr. Chen transformed his desperate midnight repairs into strategic corporate assets. She was fighting for his future, but more importantly, she was fighting for the vision that had driven her to build Chen Technologies in the first place. The live broadcast equipment surrounding the boardroom captured every word of the debate, recording a corporate drama that would either validate humanitarian technology or force its abandonment in favor of more traditional military applications. Winters shifted uncomfortably as Dr. Chen's presentation continued, clearly recognizing that her arguments were gaining traction with board members who valued innovation over conventional protocol. Aurelia makes compelling points about market advantage, admitted board member David Kim, whose background in aerospace engineering gave his opinion particular weight. But we still haven't addressed the fundamental security concerns. How do we prevent future unauthorized modifications while encouraging the kind of innovation Mac demonstrated? It was the opening Dr. Chen had been hoping for, an acknowledgement that Mac's work had value, combined with a practical question about implementation rather than condemnation. We create an innovation consulting position that gives Mac official authorization for the work he was doing unofficially, Dr. Chen replied. Senior Innovation Consultant, reporting directly to me, with explicit responsibility for identifying and addressing design flaws that standard review processes might miss. Mac realized he was watching Dr. Chen make the job offer public, transforming it from private arrangement to corporate policy that would be difficult for the board to reverse. Mac's expertise is too valuable to waste and too dangerous to ignore, Dr. Chen continued. Better to have him working within our system than watching from the outside. Winters made one final attempt to frame the situation in terms that supported his preferred outcome. This sets a dangerous precedent. What happens when other employees decide their personal expertise justifies violating security protocols? But before anyone could respond, the boardroom's main display system activated with an incoming video call that changed the entire dynamic of the meeting. Dr. Chen, this is Colonel Martinez with the UN Humanitarian Response Coordination Office, came the voice from the speakers. We're calling because we understand Chen Technologies is developing medical supply drones for disaster relief. Dr. Chen moved quickly to activate the room's camera system, her expression shifting from boardroom politics to international humanitarian crisis. Colonel Martinez, you're addressing our board of directors. How can we help? We have a situation developing in the Philippines. Typhoon Socorro has cut off 3 islands from traditional supply routes. Approximately 8,000 people need immediate medical assistance, but weather conditions make helicopter delivery impossible. The colonel's words carried the urgency of lives hanging in the balance, transforming the boardroom debate from abstract corporate policy to immediate humanitarian need. Our meteorologists estimate a narrow window for drone operations, perhaps 6 hours, when wind conditions might allow unmanned aircraft to reach the affected areas. We need aircraft capable of carrying medical supplies through severe weather conditions. Mac felt his heart rate spike as he realized the colonel was describing exactly the kind of mission that would test his modifications under the most demanding real-world conditions imaginable. "Colonel, our prototypes could potentially handle those conditions," Dr. Chen replied carefully. "But this would be our first deployment under extreme weather circumstances. Dr. Chen, people are dying. Traditional aircraft can't reach them. If your drones have any chance of completing this mission, we need to discuss deployment immediately." The boardroom fell silent as the implications registered. Mac's unauthorized modifications, which had been the subject of political debate moments earlier, might now represent the difference between life and death for thousands of people trapped by natural disaster. Winters looked uncomfortable as he realized the conversation had shifted beyond corporate protocol to humanitarian crisis that would be difficult to oppose without appearing callous. "Colonel Martinez," Dr. Chen said, "we'll need 30 minutes to consult with our engineering team and confirm our aircraft's capabilities for this mission profile." "Understood. But Dr. Chen, if you can help these people, please don't let bureaucracy delay the decision. We're running out of time." The video call ended, leaving the boardroom to grapple with a reality that none of them had anticipated when the meeting began. Mac's modifications were no longer hypothetical improvements to be debated. They were potentially life-saving technology facing immediate deployment under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The live broadcast equipment that had been recording corporate politics was now documenting a humanitarian crisis that would test everything Chen Technologies claimed to represent. The 30-minute deadline that Colonel Martinez had imposed transformed the boardroom from a venue for corporate politics into a crisis command center. Dr. Chen established video connections with the engineering team, while Mac found himself thrust into the role of technical consultant for a mission that could validate or destroy everything he had worked to achieve. "The typhoon conditions are beyond our original design parameters," Dr. Voss reported from the engineering lab, her voice carrying the tension of someone tasked with impossible calculations. "Wind speeds of up to 80 knots, severe turbulence, and visibility near zero. Standard protocols would ground all aircraft operations." Mac studied the meteorological data streaming across the boardroom displays, his engineer's mind automatically processing wind patterns and stress loads that would challenge any aircraft, much less experimental drones. But his modifications had been specifically designed to address exactly these kinds of extreme conditions. "Dr. Voss, the reinforcements I installed were calculated for wind loads exceeding design specifications," Mac said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "The joint systems should be able to handle the stress patterns we're seeing in the weather data." Robert Winters shifted uncomfortably as Mac's expertise became central to the humanitarian mission that the board could hardly oppose without appearing heartless. "Can we guarantee mission success?" Winters asked, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "The liability exposure alone." "There are no guarantees in disaster relief," Dr. Chen interrupted. "But Mac's modifications give us the best chance of reaching people who will die without medical assistance." The engineering team's analysis continued in real time, with technical data streaming across multiple displays as they evaluated Unit 4's capabilities against typhoon conditions. Mac found himself explaining stress calculations and joint specifications to board members who were struggling to understand technology that could mean life or death for thousands of people. The original design would have failed catastrophically under these conditions, Mac explained, pointing to computer models that showed stress concentration points exceeding material tolerances. "My reinforcements redistribute those loads through multiple pathways, essentially making the aircraft anti-fragile rather than just strong." Margaret Hewitt leaned forward with the expression of someone beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were discussing. "You're saying Mac's unauthorized modifications are the only thing that makes this mission possible?" That's exactly what I'm saying, Mac replied. Dr. Chen activated her connection to Colonel Martinez, the urgency of the humanitarian crisis overriding corporate protocol. Colonel, we believe our aircraft can complete the mission, but we need real-time weather updates and precise coordinates for the medical supply drops. Dr. Chen, the situation is deteriorating rapidly, the colonel replied, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions made under extreme pressure. We have pregnant women in labor without medical assistance, children with severe dehydration, and elderly people whose medication was lost in the typhoon. Every hour of delay increases the casualty count. The boardroom fell silent as the human cost of their deliberations became unavoidably clear. This was no longer about corporate policy or employment disputes. It was about whether Chen Technologies would risk its most advanced prototype to save lives that no other aircraft could reach. Mac made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "I'll pilot the mission personally," he announced, his voice cutting through the technical discussions and political considerations. Dr. Chen stared at him with an expression of shock. "Mac, you're not a certified drone pilot." "No, but I understand the aircraft's modifications better than anyone else. If the structural integrity becomes questionable during flight, I'll know how to compensate in ways that standard pilots wouldn't recognize." Mac's father's welding torch, which had been sitting in his storage unit since his unemployment began, suddenly seemed relevant to the discussion. The artifact that represented generational expertise and the courage to claim his rightful place would soon become the symbol of his transformation from invisible janitor to recognized expert. "The control systems are intuitive enough for someone with engineering background," Mac continued, "and if these aircraft are going to fail, I'd rather they fail with someone who understands why." Robert Winters made one final attempt to prevent what he clearly saw as reckless precedent-setting. "This is exactly the kind of cowboy mentality that creates liability exposure. We need certified professionals, not janitors playing engineer." But board member David Kim cut him off with the quiet authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in aerospace environments. "Robert, people are dying while we debate credentials. If Mac's modifications make this mission possible, and if he's willing to risk his own safety to prove their reliability, then we should support the mission rather than obstruct it." Dr. Chen looked around the boardroom, reading expressions that suggested the tide had turned against Winter's obstructionist approach. "All in favor of authorizing the humanitarian mission with Mac as pilot consultant?" 6 hands rose around the table. Only Winters abstained, his expression suggesting reluctant acceptance of a decision he couldn't prevent without appearing callous. "Colonel Martinez, Chen Technologies is authorizing deployment of Unit 4 for your humanitarian mission," Dr. Chen announced. "We'll have the aircraft prepared for transport to your staging area within 2 hours. Dr. Chen, if this works, if your aircraft can reach those people, you'll have saved thousands of lives." The weight of that responsibility settled over the boardroom as the video call ended. Mac found himself at the center of a mission that would either vindicate his expertise or expose him as a fraud who had endangered lives through unauthorized modifications. "Mac," Dr. Chen said quietly, "are you absolutely certain about the structural integrity?" Mac pulled his father's welding torch from the briefcase he had brought to the Matinga tool that had been passed down through 3 generations of craftsmen who had built things designed to last. The torch represented not just technical capability, but the moral obligation to stand behind work that mattered. "Dr. Chen, I stake my reputation and my life on those modifications," Mac replied. "If they fail, it won't be because the engineering was wrong. It will be because the conditions exceeded anything that any aircraft could handle." Within hours, Mac would be piloting a prototype aircraft through typhoon conditions toward islands where thousands of people waited for medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death. His unauthorized midnight repairs would face the ultimate test under conditions that would either prove his expertise or expose him as a janitor who had overestimated his abilities. The torch that his father had used to build bridges and his grandfather had used to construct ships would soon become the symbol of Mac's transformation from desperate job seeker to the expert who stood behind his work when lives depended on its reliability. 6 months later, MacAllister stood on the observation deck of Chen Technologies' new Humanitarian Operations Center, watching Unit 4 undergo final preparations for its 15th disaster relief mission. The aircraft that had once carried his secret modifications now bore official designations and certifications, its innovative joint systems having become the industry standard for extreme weather drone operations. The morning Seattle sun painted the harbor in shades of gold and amber, but Mac's attention was focused on the bustle of activity below. Emergency medical supplies destined for earthquake victims in Central America filled the cargo bay, while technicians conducted pre-flight checks with procedures that Mac had helped develop. "Daddy, will you be flying today?" Rosie asked, tugging on the sleeve of his dress shirt. At 8 years old, she had grown accustomed to visiting her father's workplace, her breathing now clear and strong, thanks to the comprehensive treatment plan that his insurance coverage had made possible. "Not today, sweetheart," Mac replied, lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see over the safety railing. "Dr. Martinez is our pilot for this mission. I just make sure the aircraft are strong enough to do their job." Rosie nodded with the satisfied understanding of a child whose world had become stable and predictable. Her asthma was well controlled now, her medical care managed by specialists who no longer represented financial catastrophe. The rescue inhaler that had once symbolized their desperation now served as routine medication in a life defined by security rather than crisis. Dr. Chen joined them on the observation deck, carrying the new company badge that identified Mac as Chief Innovation Engineer, a title that reflected both his technical expertise and his unique perspective on problems that conventional approaches might miss. "The UN called this morning, Dr. Chen reported. They want to discuss expanding our disaster relief fleet. Apparently, our aircraft are the only ones capable of operating in conditions that ground traditional helicopters." Mac smiled at the irony. The modifications he had performed in desperation, violating protocols and risking his employment, had become the foundation for a humanitarian technology revolution that was saving lives around the world. "Any word from the Philippines mission?" Mac asked. "All 8,000 people evacuated successfully," Dr. Chen replied. "Zero aircraft losses, zero mission failures. The joint reinforcement system you developed has become the benchmark for extreme weather operations." The Typhoon mission that had tested Mac's modifications under the most demanding conditions imaginable had succeeded beyond anyone's projections. Unit 4 had completed 17 supply runs through weather that would have destroyed conventional aircraft, delivering medical assistance to islands that had been cut off from all other forms of aid. The success had transformed Chen Technologies from a struggling startup facing board pressure to pivot toward military applications into the industry leader in humanitarian drone technology. Orders for Mac's reinforcement systems came from disaster relief organizations around the world, generating revenue that made military contracts unnecessary. "Dr. Chen, there's something I need to tell you," Mac said, his voice carrying the weight of a confession he had been preparing for months. Dr. Chen studied his expression with concern. "What is it, Mac?" "I've been working on new modifications," Mac admitted. "Not unauthorized this time, everything documented and approved through proper channels. But I think I've found a way to extend our aircraft's range by 30% without compromising structural integrity." Dr. Chen's worried expression shifted to amusement as she realized Mac was announcing innovation rather than problems. "You're telling me you've solved our range limitations?" "I think so. The technique involves variable geometry wing connections that adapt to flight conditions. It's based on principles I developed for bridge joints that need to flex with wind loads." Mac pulled out a tablet displaying technical diagrams that showed wing systems capable of morphing configuration during flight, adapting to conditions in ways that maximized efficiency while maintaining structural strength. "This could revolutionize disaster relief operations," Dr. Chen said, studying the designs with growing excitement. Aircraft that can reach remote areas we currently can't serve. That's the idea, Mac agreed. I've learned to work within the system instead of around it. The observation deck's intercom crackled with an announcement from the Flight Operations Center. Unit 4 cleared for takeoff. Medical supplies en route to Guatemala disaster zone. Mac and Rosie watched the aircraft lift off with the smooth precision that had become routine for Chen Technologies' humanitarian fleet. The prototype that had once carried secret modifications now represented proven technology that had saved thousands of lives and established new standards for disaster relief operations. "Daddy, are you happy with your job now?" Rosie asked, her question carrying the simple directness that children brought to complex situations. Mac considered the question as he watched Unit 4 disappear into the morning sky, carrying medical supplies to people who needed help that only his innovations could provide. 6 months earlier, he had stood outside this same building, pleading for any work that could provide insurance coverage for his daughter. Now he held a position that utilized his expertise while serving humanitarian purposes that gave meaning to technical achievement. "Yes, sweetheart," Mac replied. "I think I finally found the job I was meant to do." Dr. Chen smiled at the exchange, remembering the desperate stranger who had approached her outside the service entrance with a simple plea. "Please give me any job, Mom. I'll do anything." The corporate revolution that had followed Mac's hiring had transformed Chen Technologies from a company threatened by board politics into an organization that valued innovation over credentials, expertise over employment history, and humanitarian purpose over quarterly profits. "Mac, there's one more thing," Dr. Chen said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. The board voted unanimously to establish the MacAllister Innovation Fund. It provides college scholarships for children of unemployed technical workers and research grants for engineers developing humanitarian applications for existing technology. Mac stared at the envelope containing documentation of an endowment that would help other families avoid the desperation he had experienced. The fund represented recognition that valuable expertise often resided in unexpected places, and that corporate success could serve purposes beyond shareholder profits. The first scholarship recipient is starting at MIT this fall. Dr. Chen continued, a young woman whose father lost his job in the aerospace downsizing. Her mother works 3 part-time jobs to pay for her daughter's education. Mac thought of all the talented people whose skills went unrecognized because economic pressures forced them into employment that didn't match their capabilities. The scholarship fund would provide opportunities for families facing the same desperation that had driven him to plead for janitorial work. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Mac returned to his engineering laboratory, where bridge design principles were being adapted for aircraft applications that could change the future of disaster relief. The tools and reference materials that had once been stored in a unit he could barely afford now occupied a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to humanitarian innovation. His new company badge identifying him as Chief Innovation Engineer rather than maintenance worker represented more than professional advancement. It symbolized the recognition that expertise and worth weren't always reflected in conventional credentials, and that sometimes the most valuable contributions came from people who had been overlooked by traditional hiring processes. The evening news that night would report Chen Technologies' successful mission to Guatemala, highlighting aircraft capable of operating in conditions that grounded all other relief efforts. The story would mention the innovative joint systems developed by the company's engineering team, but it wouldn't identify the former janitor whose midnight modifications had made such missions possible. Mac preferred it that way. His satisfaction came not from public recognition but from the knowledge that his work was saving lives, that his daughter's future was secure, and that his expertise was finally being used for purposes that mattered. Walking home through the Seattle evening with Rosie's hand in his, Mac carried the quiet contentment of someone who had found not just employment, but purpose. The corporate tower that had once seemed impossibly remote now represented a workplace where innovation was valued and humanitarian goals took precedence over military applications. The bridge designs that had exposed his true expertise remained in his office, not as artifacts from a previous life, but as the foundation for ongoing work that connected engineering excellence with human need. Sometimes, Mac reflected, the strongest bridges weren't built with steel and concrete, but with the recognition that every person possessed worth that transcended their employment circumstances. In his pocket, Rosie's current inhaler served as a reminder of how far they had traveled from the desperation that had driven him to beg for work outside a service entrance. The medication that had once represented financial catastrophe now symbolized the security that allowed him to focus on innovation rather than survival. MacAllister had found more than a job at Chen Technologies. He had discovered that sometimes when you're willing to do anything for the people you love, you find exactly the place where your skills can change the world.